Good morning. So it's been a while since I've spoken about anything, and to be honest, I've just been kind of sitting back and absorbing the stuff that's been coming out, right? And a lot of it, what I'm going to be talking about today, is related to the Epstein files, but it's going to be expanded a little bit broader than that, and including those files as well, right? And what I want to try and do here is normalize the conversation, right? And assess it clearly and rationally, right? Because there's a lot of people that are kind of going, oh my God, what's going on here? Have people really been doing this? Have people been engaged in the worst, most despicable acts, right? And is there a big interconnected web spanning most of the globe that is involved in the destruction of innocence and the ruination of lives, right? Most likely, okay? And whilst that might be surprising or even shocking to people who've stumbled across this information probably for the first time, it shouldn't be that surprising, right? And if it's hitting you as fantastic or beyond the realms of possibility, then that's a reflection on yourself rather than a reflection on the presence of such acts in the world, right? Because we have precedents for these things. And I have a couple of little notes just to keep me on track, because I tend to wander and ramble. So I'd probably be looking at these, right? But in terms of the abuse of children, the trafficking of children, the connection between street level organized, semi-organized crime and criminality related to such things, and how that's connected up the fractal of power, right? Ireland, we should be beyond skepticism when it comes to accepting that these dynamics occur, have occurred, and most likely still occur today, okay? Now, before I start talking about certain things, I'm going to be naming certain organisations, right? So the Catholic Church is an obvious one when it comes to Ireland. However, I don't want people to get stuck on the Catholic Church, as in it was just the church doing this, and since the church lost its power, therefore it doesn't happen anymore. No. While some people might be members of the church hierarchy, the Gardaí, or whatever the other case is, we're dealing with types of people, right? So they might change their organisation affiliation, or they might move from working in the government to working for a pharmacy company, or whatever the case is. Keep your eye on the ball here, right? That we're dealing with people whose interests, whose beliefs might be totally antagonistic to your own. So antagonistic and so opposing that they might seem outlandish and fantastic to you, okay? And not fantastic as in great, but otherworldly, beyond the realm of possibility, right? That stuff just doesn't happen here. How could you possibly want to do these certain things, right? But just because you can't fathom why certain people would do such things does not mean that these people, or some people, do not do these things, okay? So Ireland, over the last 100 years at least, okay, we have had state-sponsored and state-approved, through silence, right, if not direct complicity in these acts. You could even argue, and I could argue, that the state was directly involved in it, right? But we have had a century of cover-ups in this country directly related to the trafficking of children, right? We know this. We know that children were being sold out of this country for adoption, right? They were sold by nuns, again, people, right? They were sold by people in this country. Children were taken from parents, mothers, and they were sold, shipped across the world, right? That is the definition of trafficking, for monetary gain. Trafficking. We've also had a government allowed, permitted, sponsored, and covered up the medical experimentation of children in this country, particularly with vaccines. going back from the 1920s, 30s, all the way up to the 60s and 70s. And you could argue continued on, right? This occurred in the mother and baby homes with I think it's an English company, which is now known as GlaxoSmithKline, right? This is demonstrably provable. This is known, right? You can quibble over it or argue about it if you want, that's fine. But this is known to have occurred, okay? You can also track that up to the modern day and say that these things have continued on, right? These issues and problems that are still historically unfolding in the present time become so emotionally loaded, right, that it's nearly part of human nature that there's no resolution until the thing is long past, and then people can look at it with more of a balanced view, right? But what is beyond debate, even in this country, is that these things have happened here, right? These things have happened. We have government will conduct these reports, right? We had the 2009 report, the Ryan report, and we've another one that followed on the abuse of children in religious organizations, in religiously ran organizations, and fundamentally under the watch of the government, right? We've had Ferry House in Clonmel, and we have these other, what's the name of them, kind of reformatory schools, right? Borstals, if you want to take the English word for it, where children were brutalized. And I'm sure people probably know, even if you don't know someone's story, I guarantee you've met someone who suffered it in these institutions, right? And this was revealed in the Dáil as well, and the guy who used Dáil privilege to say these things, I forget his name always escapes me. Perhaps someone could share his name, but he used the Dáil privilege to name or to express the fact that there was someone named in these interviews, witness testimonies from children who'd been in these institutions, reformatory schools, whatever you want to call them, right? Name someone from the Department of Education who was involved in going from, I think it was Cappoquin was one of them, but there was certainly a Waterford one, and Clonmel, named as being a perpetrator of child abuse. And there was also reference to the fact that animals were included in this sort of abuse, right? Now, what's interesting about this is you never see any real criminal prosecutions of these things. You have these reports that take years and years and years to conclude, and nothing ever happens with them, right? So that's a cover-up. That's a cover-up. It kind of makes the government look like they're doing something, but they're not really, right? They're just documenting what is known, right? And you could see if you switch your perspective, if you're involved, or if you know people that are involved in this sort of thing, and you're tasked with assuring that people involved in this are protected as possible, you go and seek information, right? So you'd go and you'd interview these witnesses and victims and see what kind of names come up, see what kind of information that they give, right? And then what do you do with it? You hide it behind some report, right, where you're given a synopsis of the aggregate of information, right? You're not given whole witness testimony. How come none of these people are given testimony on the media in courts, right? It just doesn't seem to happen, okay? So cover up. Ineffective leadership, if you want to be very generous with it, right? But the idea that children were being abused in this country by people in positions of power, and i.e. priests at the time, right, or lay workers that were involved in these religious orders or religious organizations, religiously ran organizations, teachers, all that sort of stuff. These reports have also highlighted the fact that Gardaí turned a blind eye to a large degree. And what is criminal about that is they allowed for a two-tier justice system to occur and to thrive in this country, right? So we had an organization, a collection of people who all adhere to the same fundamental belief structure and power structure, right? They took the head of the Roman Church as their leader, and they also assumed authority to abide by their own internal legal structure, right? They did not believe the law of the land in Ireland applied to them. And the Gardaí, who are supposed to be insurers of the law of the land and protectors of the peace, they allowed for that, right? They allowed for that. They allowed for the Catholic Church to deal with these things in-house instead of prosecuting them criminally. Okay? We know that. There's been a couple of scapegoat priests that have been defrocked maybe, or have served some time, or have been arrested and charged, right? But the sheer scale of children being abused in this country goes way beyond 2 or 3 dirty priests, okay? And it also includes the guards who allowed these things to occur. It involves the solicitors and barristers and the court systems who also allowed this, who did not speak about this, right? Who did not use their position effectively for the stabilization of law and the protection of vulnerable children in this country, right? They did not use their position. And every successive Minister for Justice and Minister for Education and anyone involved in the Dáil or the government that has come as a result of these last few decades or over the last century, right, that did not highlight this and did not use their position to get the full force of the state apparatus to combat these things, they're all accountable, right? They're all accountable. They're part of a cover-up, right? Because criminality is not just what you do. It's also what you choose not to do given the position that you have, right? So there's a moral culpability involved in that. Whether that spills over into criminal culpability, that's what investigations are for, right? And we haven't really had any, okay? So just to set the scene, there is absolute precedence in this country for the most powerful people in this land, socially, legally, governmentally, politically, right, that are engaged in this, whether directly implicated or whether as like passive observers and passive permitters of this by not using the full weight of the positions that they have, right, to protect children in this country, which is their job, right? It absolutely core part of their job, which is to allow for the peace and stability of all people in this country, right? So the precedence is there. So the only kind of details that seem to befuddle people is not that abuse occurs or has occurred on a systematic state level across this country, right? We accept that, but many people kind of stop there, right? Because no one wants to be reading this stuff because it's disgusting, it's filthy, it's evil, and it is unnatural, right? And there are very few words that actually convey the meaning or convey the barbarity of these kinds of acts. So people just don't bother reading any further, right? Well, okay, yeah, we get it, we understand that dirty priests, all that stuff, and we kind of leave it at that, right? So when we hear things that may include ceremonies, rituals, sacraments, if you want to call it that, right, that may involve the ritualistic killing of people, the ritualistic ingestion maybe of people, we kind of balk at it, okay? That doesn't happen. That's madness. That if that was going on, people would be arrested, okay? No, they wouldn't naturally be, right? It's nice to believe, and it is a lovely, hopeful, optimistic, and perhaps even a slightly innocent and naive perspective to take, that any such reprehensible acts in this country would naturally feel the full hammer of the law on it. The point of me pointing out the precedent in Ireland is that there's no rational reason to assume that the two things, one would lead to the other, right? If anything, our history over the last century would lead a reasonable person to assume that these acts, if they were to be occurring in this country, would not meet justice, right? That would be the natural default setting to take, given the precedent that we've set out in this country. is that such things could absolutely be hidden in this country, right? Not only hidden out of an inability to conduct one's job or profession in a reasonable way, but actively covered over, right? Actively covered over. So that brings us to today, right? And what I'm going to do for the next few minutes is go over a little bit of a timeline, right? I don't know, and again, I'll add this caveat. I'm perfectly humble and okay with my ignorance on these things. I know what I don't know, right? And I'm a little bit sure of some things that I do know, but most of what I talk about, I can't prove. Okay? This is like a kind of gathered consensus of things that are supposed to have happened. Are they open to interpretation, and are they open to being proven to be incorrect? Absolutely. But I'm just going to offer out a few things, right? Also recognizing that I don't know, and neither do you, and that's okay, right? Because what that stops us doing is landing on a conclusion prematurely and selling that conclusion to people and getting frustrated with them when they don't buy the conclusion, right? So gather the information, mull it over, right? Even if I don't believe this certain perspective, what is the explanatory power of it, right? Because some theories or ideas or perspectives, while they might seem beyond the pale, they also have incredible explanatory power as to making sense of what we're seeing in the world, right? And I'll get back to that in a little while, right? I have 2 pages of notes, so I'm going to jump around both of them. So, when dealing with the Epstein thing, we're drawn to America for a start, right? And I'm going to flip around on the timeline a little bit here, but I think it's important to set the table first and then come back to a few things that retrospectively seem to hold more weight and substance to it, right? And pose more questions, right? Questions. But I will start with 2013, okay? With Edward Snowden. And he was an NSA contractor, right? The National Security Agency for America. Big intelligence service, right? Gathering of information. And he blew the whistle, whether he's legit or not, whatever. But he blew the whistle on the fact that America was allowing for the surveilling of not just American citizens in America, but also American citizens abroad. And not only American citizens, but American tech companies and American companies as a whole, right? So if you were in Ireland and you were working for an American tech company, the NSA allowed themselves the ability to surveil you, to gather information on you, and to track your own personal data, right? Phone calls, emails, all that stuff. And this was known as PRISM. That was the operation or the program, right? And what they were doing is they were collecting data from American companies. So Google, Apple, Microsoft, right? So if you were using a Google Gmail, if you were using Apple products, or if you were using Windows, the American intelligence apparatus had the ability to gather information on you, okay? Now, this came out when Angela Merkel, in 2000 and... I forget the year, right? I don't have it written down here. But she was being spied on. And this created a big kerfuffle in Europe, right? So privacy acts, the GDPR programs, GDPR acts, all this sort of stuff came about as a result of that, because European leaders started to recognize and understand that their private phone calls, their private phone use was being monitored, and the information was being extracted from it, right? And on top of that, Edward Snowden said in 2015 that 35 world leaders were being monitored, right? 35 world leaders. So there's an apparatus that existed in America that had widespread connections and a widespread scope beyond the boundaries of America. This is when Obama was in office, okay? We know that Obama had also spied on Donald Trump in the lead up to his inauguration, right? And we also know now that Obama was involved with the CIA and the FBI in creating the hoax that Trump, at least this particular story, that Trump was an agent of Russia and he was involved in these reprehensible things in Russia, right? We now know that Obama knew that story was concocted and that they were going to run with it anyway, right? So these people are morally reprehensible and criminally reprehensible too, right? We move on. I go back a second, right? So 2015, Trump is running for office. And what he does that year and the following years is he makes a beeline and a claim that one of the primary concerns of his administration and himself was the destruction of child trafficking rings, right? And this seems to go unnoticed because the mainstream media and much of the media, and just to the sheer persistence and scope of it, has led many people to just condemn anything that comes from Trump as the ramblings of a madman, and he's a horrible person, and therefore he can't do any good in the world. Okay? How do you know, right? I don't know. I certainly know the perspective that's been told to me by 99.9% of the media in this country. I understand that. I also then look at the things that I've seen him say, and then I look to see if that's been reported by the Irish media. So the fact that you have a world leader who's been consistent over the last 10 years and longer, right? We'll get to that. Of speaking about children being kidnapped, children being trafficked, and children being sold into slavery. That's massive stuff. Right? Massive stuff. And surely that is something that should be backed from someone in such a position, who's using his position and who's using his authority to highlight probably one of the most commonly agreeable things as being up there in terms of evil in this world. The exploitation, the monetary gain, the selling of children into slavery, and worse again, right? What happens to these children when they when they outlive their usefulness, okay? Surely that's something that, even if you don't like Donald Trump and the media has a horrible relationship with him and they hate him and all that stuff, if we're being fair, you would expect to see stories highlighting the fact that this man is using his office and his position to highlight such horrible things. That should give him some sort of brownie points, right? No. That stuff is just not reported by the Irish media, right? So instantly I look at that and I say, okay, there's obviously an agenda here to demonize this man because he's doing a good thing here by naming this, and that's not reported on. Why? That's not fair, right? That's unjust. So instantly there's a question mark then over everything that the media in Ireland, and pick a country, right? The media tends to be the same in terms of Donald Trump. There's a serious question mark for me over everything that's sold to me about him, right? So when they sell me an idea on him, I will go and listen to his presentations or his speeches, 40, 50 minutes long, an hour, 2 hours long, and listen to what the man has said, okay? And then gotta take that information and just mull on it. Just mull on it. Don't jump onto conclusions, because we don't have all the information. We don't have all the facts. It's bizarre that people seem to think that they would be privy to more information than Donald Trump is about certain things, right? We wouldn't be. And my point on this and the need to introduce the Edward Snowden thing is that Obama was using it to spy on foreign leaders, right, world leaders, and on probably most people that had a Gmail account, right, or had Windows or used Apple technology, whatever. That apparatus was still in place when Donald Trump took office, right? So the scope and the ability and the information that was gathered by Obama's administration on world leaders and whatever amount of other people, Donald Trump may be now privy to that, right? So what does he decide to do with that? Now, the thing about that is, if you were to have been charged for whatever crime, and the information that was garnered or gathered on you was taken through this PRISM program, more than likely you would be able to challenge the legality of that in court. And more than likely, if you had swift enough and savvy enough solicitors or barristers or lawyers, they would be able to get that evidence squashed, right? So, whilst Trump got into office and probably was privy to all of this blackmail information that Obama was clearly using, could he use that to bring charges against people? He could. But what would happen? The constitutional legality of that information and how it was gathered would be challenged in court by people who are obviously being charged, right? And more than likely it would be thrown out. Which means that the case is done, right? And unless you get new information, you can't bring a secondary case against the person, right? So the ability to hold people account would be squandered because you're after using information or evidence that was gathered illegally or unconstitutionally. Therefore, even though it might be correct, you cannot use it legally. So you have to go another way around it, right? You have to gather information and be able to introduce it legally. So we have Trump takes office 2016. Then we have John Podesta, who was the chief of staff for Bill Clinton when he was president. He was a counselor to Barack Obama, and he was the chair of Hillary Clinton's campaign, presidential election campaign, right, the candidacy. So influential man, held multiple powerful positions across at least 3 administrations. Hillary Clinton obviously had her administration set up. If she got elected, she didn't. But he was involved in it anyway. And what happened to him, it's funny then, right? So we were given these stories that Podesta was sent like a phishing link, like you've been the 10,000 person to do this, click on this and you win magical stuff, right? And he's said to have clicked on it, okay? And what this allowed, apparently, this allowed for WikiLeaks to be able to gather or end up with in the possession of 50,000 of this man's emails. Right? I would imagine what's happening there is that this prism, this information gathering that has been up and running since at least Obama, was now being used to target individuals and highlight some things about them, right? So what did we learn from these 50,000 emails? The main thing I would suggest that came out of this was what became known as Pizzagate, right? And Pizzagate was people recognizing that in these 50,000 emails between Podesta and other political influential people, right? Business people, political people, bureaucratic people, right? Whoever he's involved in sending emails to. There was a common occurrence and reoccurrence of the use of words related to food, right? And sometimes they maybe made sense, so going to have pizza Saturday, and then other times they didn't, right? And this spilt out into not just politics or politicians and their emails. It led people to start to look at certain celebrities and their use of words like pizza, cheese pizza, pasta, these kinds of things, ice cream, right? So people started speaking about this, going, well, what is the prevalence of this? Pizza, pizza, pizza. Cheese pizza, right? And this led to some people discussing the idea that these words were euphemisms, or they were code words, right? They were code words for the abuse of children, right? So cheese pizza is CP, right? Child crime. And this led then to the linking of certain pizza shops, one in Washington, D.C., and another one right beside it, right? I'm not going to get long-winded about this, but we're just plotting the marks, right? This led to people investigating, right, and gathering information and asking questions. So what do these words mean, right? Why do these people continuously use these words? Is it just innocent and they're talking about their dietary preferences? Perhaps, perhaps not, right? It could be something more sinister. People then started looking at the symbolism of certain pizza shops, right? And one of them, called Besta Pizza, had their logo was a triangle and then another kind of semi-spiralic triangle inside of it, right? And what happened then was that this symbol was released, or has been shown to be from the FBI, a symbol that is synonymous with PDF files, right? With the exploitation of children. It's like a bat signal for the depraved, right? And it's also the symbol that is used to demonstrate or to show your preference for certain types of children, right? Kind of like the HB logo, the ice cream logo we have in Ireland, where you have the heart and then you have the heart inside the heart, right? These sorts of things have been speculated to be, and in some cases explicitly stated to be, related to child abuse, right? So what I want to do now is show something very interesting, and this is coming out as a result of the Epstein files, right? So what the Epstein files is after doing, or is after allowing for, is people to build on what was gathered and understood from the Pizzagate stuff, the Podesta emails, the Edward Snowden stuff, all of that. And what people did naturally is they started looking, and you can do this on the DOJ.gov American website. You can go and search all of these Jeffrey Epstein millions of emails, put in a word and search and see if it comes up, right? And that doesn't mean that any word that comes up or name that comes up is automatically a criminal. It just means that somewhere along the line there was communication or their name was mentioned in Jeffrey Epstein's emails, okay? And what people have done is they have searched the word pizza, and they have found again that there is an occurrence and a reoccurrence of people involved in Jeffrey Epstein's network where they're using the word pizza or other food types, right? So like grape juice, grape soda, and the word jerky, right? But the word jerky is being used in instances that just seem that doesn't fit, right? So beef jerky is, what is it, like smoked beef that is allowed to nearly kind of ferment, if you want to use that word, right? Smoked, it can be left out and consumed probably years after it's made, right? But there's a continuous amount of references to people seeking beef jerky, or not beef jerky, just jerky. And Epstein is saying that he has jerky, 5 bags of it in the freezer. Why you'd be freezing beef jerky, not sure, right? And I'm looking for jerky. Can you walk some jerky over to me? This sort of thing, right? Just bizarre threads on, like, this chef is coming and he's bringing jerky, and this chef is from a cannibal restaurant, right? The name of the restaurant is the Cannibal Restaurant or something like that, right? Weird stuff, okay? Weird when you're trying to overlay your worldview onto it, okay? But not necessarily weird if we consider the fact that these people, they take... I'll come back to that in a minute with something else, right? I just want to draw another few things clear to show that the abuse of children and the levels of power in not just Ireland, but in a lot of countries, it's so in your face that, like your nose, right? At a certain point, you just stop seeing it, even though if you pay attention, you can clearly see your nose with your eyes, right? It's always nearly there in front of you. But it becomes invisible due to its proximity to us, right? And a lot of this stuff, it's so on the nose and in your face that, and blatant, that we tend to naturally assume, or maybe not naturally, we tend to default assume that because it's so obvious, there couldn't possibly be any criminal undertones or anything morally negative about it, right? Because otherwise people would have copped and something would have been done, right? This naive perspective that so many of us have, right? I will draw attention to Jeffrey Epstein, who clearly involved with Bill Clinton, right, President of the United States of America. How high do you want to go? He friends of Prince Andrew, or friends, right, whatever you want to call it. Clearly blackmailing, looks like, Prince Andrew, right? So you've the top political seat in America tied to Jeffrey Epstein, who now probably would have been convicted as an unbelievably prolific child predator and child trafficker, right? Now, we have Prince Andrew, part of the British royal family, tied to this man, America's probably most prolific child predator. And if that wasn't bad enough, then you have Prince Charles, or King Charles now, who's had a very close relationship with Jimmy Savile, who just happens to be Britain's most prolific child trafficker and child abuser. Like, what are the odds of that happening? What are the odds of one family of such prestige and power, right, and degrees of security around them, that in order to get anywhere close to having any sort of relationship or entering any of these people's homes, you would be vetted unbelievably by the British intelligence service, and probably whatever secretive intelligence service that the British royal family uses itself, right? So the idea that what Jimmy Savile was engaged in was unknown to the royal family or to the British intelligence, that's what's unbelievable, right? That this man is having Christmas dinners with Margaret Thatcher, and he's also involved in the destruction and the abuse of probably unbelievable numbers, right? But actual numbers, probably in the thousands, right? And baked into these Operation U-Tree, right? I think that was the operation that was involved in investigating Jimmy Savile, or conducting a report following his death, or whatever the case is, right? Is you have witness testimony again. And again, we can all agree that Jimmy Savile was this. I can accept that. Yeah, he looks like exactly what he's been claimed to have been, right? Anyone that... The fact that people could look at Jimmy Savile and not automatically assume that he was filthy shows that our ability to trust our instincts and our senses has been derailed, right? Because he told people what he was. You can go back and watch his interviews. He tells people what he was into. He laughs about it so people think, haha, joke. But he was dead serious. He was laughing in people's faces, right? And he looked exactly like what he's claimed to have been. But some of the witness testimonies start to introduce us to darker topics, right? And darker, not just in the behavior and in the intention and in the actions that these people were taking, but also theologically, if you want, right? Or philosophically. Because we've been brought up, most of us European people, right, and we have hints of pre-Christian understandings of the world just based on the long-standing history of our people, the European people, right? So we have pagan elements in our mind, in our psyche, but we also have the overlay of Roman Catholicism or Roman theology, right? A Roman worldview was introduced and superimposed onto our pagan worldview, right? And our European mind has kind of been constantly in a state of tension. It hasn't really resolved the tension between pre-Christian worldview and the Christian worldview. But what we're kind of left with as a default is that our understanding of God and theology is predominantly Christian, which means we have a God which is all merciful and good to us and wants the best for us, and he understands that our nature is tainted and we're sinners, so therefore he gave us his Son to redeem all of our sins, past, present and future. And if we make a decision to apply our lives to follow in the footsteps of God and his Son, then we are granted everlasting life in a beautiful place after death, right? After the death in this world. in a nutshell, right? And that there's an antagonistic force to God, which is Satan, and Satan can corrupt, and Satan does all the bad things, and Satan is responsible for evil in this world, right? And we can follow that path too, right? So you have God's road, the right-hand path, and Satan's road, the left-hand path, right? The occult worldview and the Christian worldview, okay? Now we must remember that when we're highlighting something as satanic, we're doing that from the perspective of Christianity, right? So Christianity will consider anything that's antagonistic to it, including pre-Christian worldview, pagan worldview, European natural worldview, right? We'll consider that satanic, right? But there's also elements of society that declare themselves to be satanic, right? And they have their own worldview. They have their own machinations of religious service, rituals, rites, perspectives on power, influence, hierarchy, and the presence and the power of rituals, particularly when using fear, blood, semen, excrement, and babies and human life itself, right? And this should not be too shocking to us, right? Because we're constantly told by Christianity that before Christianity came, nearly every people had a cult that was involved in human sacrifice, right? We're constantly told this, that the Irish people were sacrificing people, bog bodies, and we were creating the wicker men, the Celts were creating the wicker men, and the Gauls were drowning people in cauldrons and tying them to trees, right? All this sort of stuff. We're told this by the enemy of the native European people, right? So you kind of have to examine it a little bit and say, well, was this a literal thing or is it symbolic, right? Is this a mystery school sort of initiation ceremony that was taken as literal by an enemy that is looking at it from the outside, right? We don't really know, right? We can hazard a guess. But what is consistent is that there's claims, probably on both sides as well, right? On nearly all sides, that the other team, the other cult, is sacrificing children and is sacrificing human life, right? And we know that this has occurred. We know that there are magical societies, right, that have spoken about this. Aleister Crowley has spoken about this. The effectiveness of using people as sacrifices, right? And it's not a million miles away from what we're used to. So if you're Christian or Catholic, whatever, right, and you understand that the rite of communion, or the sacrament of communion, is the ingestion of the body of God become man, and the drinking of the blood of God become man, right? But we understand that it's not a cannibal thing, right? It's a symbolic thing, that we're imbibing the closest thing we can get to God on this earth, which was his offering up of his son in this physical realm for us, right? We represent that in symbolic form by taking the bread and drinking the wine, right? However, and we understand this to be a very important part of our religious and theological belief, right? But what if there's a group of people that take that literally, right? They don't see communion as a symbolic or a metaphorical thing. They take it quite literally. And they understand that to get closer to God, right, to be all-powerful, to expand your years beyond what is the norm of human life, right, to live on for as much as you can and to hopefully live forever and be all-powerful, be all-knowing, the ingestion of actual human life is necessary for that, right? What if there's people that take that literally and they act on that literally, right? And what you can see, we have this, again, it's so obvious to us, it's so blatant to us that we no longer take it seriously because it's wrapped up in fiction a lot of the times. Right, so you have like Hansel and Gretel and the witch taking the kids, wanting to take the kids in the woods and cook them, kill them, whatever. Right, funny story, right? But where did these stories come from, right? In Ireland, you have the changelings, right, where a child's nature fundamentally shifts to the point where people believe that his very essence was taken from him by the queer folk, right, the fairies. What's going on there? Right? What were these people trying to explain? And what was the actuality of what they were observing? Right? What was going on there? Right? Was it a case of these kids being abducted, being abused? Right? Because you can see in a child that has been abused, between who they were before it and who they are after it are fundamentally different. Right? You could effectively say that child has been changeling. Right? Their very nature has been nearly quenched and extinguished, right? So is that what these people were trying to gather with these fairy folk stories, right? Or is there something else? Or is there more than one thing that they were trying to wrap up in a mythic kind of a tale, right? We also have, obviously, the stories of vampires, right? Which have become overly, like, erotic and sexualized, but the very essence of it is that the ingestion of blood and the life force of another person with their consent. And remember, the vampire needs to be invited into your home, right? That this is understood across the centuries, and this is claimed across the centuries. And it's not just like peasant people or poor people involved in this. It's counts. Count Dracula, right? Big Bluebeard is another one I was reading about recently. Big, powerful people which are involved in the destruction of children and the ritualistic slaughter and, in some cases, the ingestion of children, right? It's not peculiar. What's peculiar is that such an occurrence from man is not more honestly explored by the everyday person. That's the peculiar thing, right? Because if this sort of stuff is so outlandish to somebody, would you not want people to not be terrifying people by talking about this and the potential of that? Would you not go and try and disprove this stuff, right? No, we stay away from it because I believe we know deep down that this stuff has nearly always happened, right? What the origin of it is another conversation altogether, right? But just being accepting of the fact that, questioning the fact that we're easy to accept that these things have happened before. But when the idea then is introduced to the same person that this stuff is continuing to happen, all of a sudden they're not so quick to jump on board with it. Why? That's a question for everyone to ask, right? Is there some obligation that comes with accepting that it goes on now? Probably. Is there anything you can do about it because it was going on before? Not necessarily, right? So you're off the hook in terms of things that should be done to try and combat this stuff. It's easy to say, yeah, look, it happened before, it doesn't happen now. If it happened today, I'd be the first out to condemn it, right? Or to try and uproot it. But, yeah, vampires. Again, this is why I need my notes, right? So, the idea of the vampire is that they need the blood of another to keep them going, right? And that's not just like fictional speculation on things. It kind of makes an intuitive sense, right? And science now. So before you would have had like occult or magic rituals, which are controlled situations, right? Magic rituals have just been supplanted by scientific experimentation. The very apparatus and the technical side of it are nearly two hands, right? Two hands holding each other. It's the same kind of thing. The setting needs to be controlled. The apparatus and the tools need to be controlled. The intention of what you're aimed at needs to be controlled. And all other factors that could contribute to tainting the operation need to be controlled and eliminated for, right? So magical rituals and scientific experimentation, they're synonymous to me, right? So what science has now found is that if you take the blood from a younger rat and you inject it, or you pump it into an older rat, that older rat will start to be a little bit more vigorous, right? It becomes younger. Grand, but that's only rats. That's blah, blah, blah. That's not humans, right? Sure. But the principle is sound, right? Younger life force being given to older organisms will lead to that older organism, for momentarily or for whatever duration of time, expressing itself in a way that looks like it's younger, right? Makes sense. Vampires, right? And then you start to look at people like Jeffrey Epstein and Jean-Luc Brunel, right? And these guys are involved in St. John of God as well, Oprah's spiritual advisor or spiritual guide, right? These people are involved in the harvesting of babies, right? So allegations against them are that they had massive plots of land where they were inseminating and impregnating scores of women at a time, and doing what with the babies? Selling them, using them for, again, these rituals. And also, I think Jean-Luc Brunel was said to have been trying to take the DNA from his babies once they're born, to use that, right? To keep themselves young. They seem to be obsessed, and Epstein certainly was largely interested in the prolongation of his life and his genetic lineage, right? So along with his island, he also owned a ranch in Mexico where it was alleged, witness testimony, that this girl was, what would you even call it, made pregnant, right? There's no nice way of speaking about this. And her baby was taken off her continuously, right? So when she'd give birth, her baby was taken. And apparently Epstein was interested in setting up this ranch as a way of impregnating, again, scores of women, right? To populate the earth with an increasing number of people who shared his genetic code, who were his offspring, right? And to the average man, right, who goes about his business and goes home to the wife and entertains the kids and is not so adventurous in his imagination, right? That seems like an awful amount of work. Like, it seems like an awful amount of effort and thinking, and just nearly a totally divergent way of living and seeing time and one's impact on time. It seems so different to what regular men are used to, that it bears like very little, it bears no worth in really thinking about, because it just seems mad, right? But it's not mad. This is clearly demonstrable based on the stuff that Jeffrey Epstein has said, and the stuff that he has done, and the stuff that he is alleged to have done, right? And what he was involved in as well, which the emails show, is that he was speaking to people about, he was involved with many like influencers, right? So people that make content and upload it, right? And some of it absolutely educational, right? But he wasn't looking for stupid people, right? He was very interested in people who are at the forefronts of scientific knowledge, okay? In terms of longevity, DNA, genome studies, all this sort of stuff, right? He's very, very interested in it, as was Ghislaine Maxwell, by the way, right? So he was said to have been involved and interested in creating the first designer baby, right? Cloning himself, essentially, or coming up with a way of taking the best genetics and fabricating a child exactly how you'd want it, right? So behaviorism sort of stuff, right? You have the B.F. Skinner father of behaviorism, or was it John Watson, right? One of the two anyway. They said, give me a child and give me total control of the environment of that baby, and I will create a child that will lead into and become whatever profession you want me to create for, right? So this was early 20th century. So the sort of thinking that Jeffrey Epstein and people like that are involved in is just a logical continuation of this, right? It just becomes more enhanced given the technical abilities and capabilities we have with scientific instrumentation and stuff, right? So it becomes closer. And this is what Jeffrey Epstein was involved in. And he was operating or financing labs in Ukraine that are involved in this, right? But you can't really just experiment on rats forever. Eventually you're going to have to try and make a designer baby if that's what your goal is, right? But what's the legal framework around that, right? So are you allowed to do that? Probably not in most countries, right? But Ukraine is a little bit of an outlier, right? Because it doesn't fall necessarily into the EU, nor does it fall into Russia or any other overseeing legal framework, right? It's kind of a wild east or west, whichever way you're looking at it. And what's interesting about the Ukraine is that Epstein was also involved in modeling agencies, along with the co-conspirator, one of them, Leslie Wexner, right? I think he's the founder of Victoria's Secret, right? And here's how you get women into this conversation, right? So do you know your man to set that up? Yeah, he was involved in trafficking children and trafficking women across the world, right? Interesting little tidbit, right? But a lot of these people are involved in modeling agencies because what that allows you to do is effectively traffic people, right? Because you can have child models as well. And the Ukraine, for a couple of decades now, there's been continuous stories coming out of the Ukraine being a hotbed for child trafficking, for what's the word? Surrogacy, right? So buy a baby kind of a scheme. Where those babies are come from, what's happened to them for them to get there, who knows, right? But that's what seems to be going on in Ukraine. And if you listen to Donald Putin, I was about to say, if you listen to Vladimir Putin talking about it, he's highlighting the same things, right? That these people that are involved in the Ukraine are disgusting people. They are involved in satanic rituals, and they're involved with the abuse and kidnapping of children. Again, I don't know if that's true. I'm just gathering information, right? I'm trying to inform myself as best as possible so I can see the board and see the big picture of things a little bit clearer, right? Without jumping onto a conclusion that feels okay and nice to me, right? I try and avoid that as much as possible, as you should too. So that's what's been going on. And those are my thoughts. And the point of going through all of that, I know this is getting long, right, is just to show that whilst this stuff is bubbling to the surface now, and because it's after piercing the veil to a degree into everyday discourse, this stuff has a long history of being spoken about under the surface, right? It hasn't pierced the curtain into mainstream, common, everyday discourse yet, right? It's kind of doing that now, and I think the slow trickle effect of the Epstein stuff is allowing for the ingestion and the internalization of information slowly and periodically, right? Because if it all comes out at once, there's just too much of it. It kind of comes and goes. But if it's introduced a little bit, it's allowed for time for people to mull on it and to marinate in it. And then there's more information. You're slowly laying the foundation, building the blocks of understanding, right? And building it so eventually your perspective is great because you're standing at a vantage point that allows you to see things a little bit more clearer than if everything was just divulged instantaneously, right? And I started out this by talking about the explanatory power of this. If we are to assume, which is looking likely, Especially the fact that we have resignations now in Norway, people involved in the EU stepping away, people involved in royalty, right? The English Crown coming out saying that they will allow for and they will aid in investigations, police investigations into their own people, their own family members. That would tell me that there's stuff that they know Trump has, whoever Trump is involved with, that their enemy has, and stuff that they know that they're involved in, that they are worried enough to speak publicly about it and to totally disavow their own family member, right? So there's monumental things in play here, and we're kind of seeing snippets of it, right? Enough to keep you interested, but not the whole thing yet, right? Because I think the whole thing, it's probably far darker than people are allowing themselves to venture into, but it's probably nonetheless real, right? And so, if we look at it, we have Donald Trump, never supposed to be president. People thought he was only doing it for, like, publicity. He gets in, he starts talking about chasing down child traffickers and child abusers globally. He starts introducing executive orders that allows for the seizing of assets for people that are involved in crimes against humanity, right? So he's backing up what he's saying with policy and executive orders, right? He's putting weight behind what he's saying. The whole world and their mother turns on Donald Trump. The media in nearly every country turns on him, painting the same stories and ignoring the good that he's claiming he's going to do and the good that he does effectively do. Regardless of your stance on him, we be fair, right? If it's bad, it's bad, and if it's good, it's good. We highlight it either way. Then Epstein gets arrested. And this massive, massive network that he's clearly involved in, trafficking children and adults as well, I would imagine, right? Children that grew up in that abusive structure that are now made use of as procurers of children, right? They're out doing the dirty work now. They're out doing what was done to them now, right? They're victims, yes, but they turn into criminals, right? They're slaves, essentially, but they'll have whatever amount of choice they have. So you have this network comes crashing down, right? But it needs to be replaced, right? So Epstein is not the figurehead. He's probably the figurehead, but he's not the top, right? There's probably not one person sitting on top of this whole rotten web, right? There's different nodes and different points and different groups and different cults and different gangs obviously involved in it, right? But their main focus is probably materialistic, ritualistic use of people for earthly power, right? They probably channel that, and they're probably given whatever it is that they sell their souls for, right? We even, the phrases we have, they sell their souls for it, right? So we have our words for it, we have our stories for it, we have our phrases for it, yet somehow we kind of disregard it as being real, and no, that's all fantastic conspiracy stuff. All right, yeah, it is, yeah, but that doesn't mean that it's not real, right? So you have Trump that seems to have waged war on child trafficking. You have a load of these cases where there's 1,000 kids found, 2,000 kids found. He even said they've located 300,000 children, missing children, right? Europe then there's a war that breaks out with Russia and Ukraine. Russia are saying they're going in to denazify Ukraine. They're going in because Ukraine has biolabs that they've been using to target Russian people. We know that Epstein had these labs in Ukraine where he was looking to engineer and manufacture designer babies, which means he needs babies to work with, right? Russia then takes in thousands and thousands of children from the Ukraine. They're slated for it as kidnapping, but maybe he was not doing that. Maybe they were taking them in to stop them from what was happening to them in Ukraine. Who knows? You have to explore these avenues, right? And except that either one of them could be true and both of them could be false, right, at the same time. So that network dries up. Now you have the war with Russia and Ukraine. You have all of a sudden these world leaders that just are endlessly pumping their money into Ukraine. Why? Why? Like, it doesn't make sense, right? You then have the refugee and asylum crisis, or human trafficking crisis in Europe, where, and in Ireland as well, you have tens of thousands of these unaccompanied minors, right, that we're told. So some child, the war in Ukraine and Russia is on the eastern side of Ukraine. Ukraine is a massive landmass, and we're supposed to accept that children have made their way across thousands and thousands of miles and landed in Ireland, right? And then you have these prop up social care setting organizations that are, some of them have been discovered that these people that are setting them up, they're African, they're Middle Eastern, they're not Irish people, but anyway, people nonetheless, that have been allowed to come here and that are now getting government funding from the Department of Integration and Children and Disability. Roderick O'Gorman was former the head of it. This government department are now taking your taxpayers' money and giving it to these people who've come here to set up these emergency accommodation centres to take in children that are fleeing this war, who have come here without any guidance, without any parents, and have just ended up in Ireland, unaccompanied minors. And there's tens of thousands of them across Europe. And a lot of these people, a lot of these children, we don't know how many, they are going missing. One was ending up in a brothel, one was scheduled to come here for organ harvesting. And there's also gangs of predatory males, and I would imagine there's women involved in this too, right? Predatory people going around and targeting vulnerable children who are involved in or under the care of the Irish government and state. And you then have the minister for Roderick O'Gorman, who was over the Department of Integration, blah, 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 the Department of Children. And he was given information by a judge, 4 case files, demonstrating the connection between children under government care and the exploitation at the hands of these gangs, right? And the vulnerable settings that these kids are in. Because a lot of them, I kind of just throw that out loosely, but children have been set up in these emergency accommodation centres, which are basically like B&Bs or in hotel rooms, amongst a myriad of other people that are coming from Africa, the Middle East, Eastern European people, or whatever you want, right? Who are coming here as asylum seekers. And they're being preyed on. And Roderick O'Gorman, and again, like, he's just the face of these things. You watch what politicians do using their position, and you watch what they choose not to do using their position. Okay? So Roderick O'Gorman decides that he's going to destroy 3 out of 4 of these case files under the GDPR Act, right? So he doesn't want it released. Covering it up, right? He's covering it up. And again, the whole government, the opposition as well, all that are involved in the guards, all that are involved in the Irish intelligence services, in the military, in the media, and in the Dáil itself, they refuse, and big business, right? And big business as well, all the power players, people that can use their position, people who have influential positions and choose not to use it. There's been no real direct attack or confrontation or demand for an investigation into people like Roderick O'Gorman, even though the blatant moves that they are making and have made can be said to look very much like they're trying to cover up the trafficking of children in this country, right? So the idea that you have big, powerful, highly connected people who are involved in not just the procurement and selling and trafficking of children, but they're involved in the blackmailing and recording of other powerful people. We have like singers that have been to this island. We have Bill Gates, Stephen Hawking, we have actors, we have media, we have politicians. So nearly all the layers of the societal cake, there's been significant figures. Lawrence Krauss, right? So he's said to have gone. He's like one of the leading, or he was for a while, the leading atheist speakers, right? That we came from nothing and existence just manifested out of nothing, and nothing really means anything, and therefore atheism, science, bro, right? These kinds of people who, you know that they're too intelligent to be that stupid, or maybe they're intelligent enough just to be that stupid, but their position seems so dyed in the wool, one-sided, that you have to assume that something else might be going on, right? And Deepak Chopra is another one, right? These new age gurus who are effectively trying to sell you some nihilistic Eastern philosophy that doesn't really mean anything, right? The only thing you have is now, and deny your ego, blah, 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 all that stuff, all love. These people end up to be total degenerates, right? So nearly every layer of the societal cake, every layer of culture creation, right? All the streams that run together to create the culture that we're in have had a taint in them. And the leaders of these people, or the leaders of these movements, self-appointed or otherwise, turn out to be incredibly compromised individuals. So when dealing with facts and information and speculation and all that stuff, and you're free to speculate all you want, try and stay as rooted as you can in things that you know that are true and things that you're not sure, but right? And that is the best use of a human mind, as far as I'm concerned, is the ability to speculate and to entertain a myriad of worldviews and perspectives without being anchored to one indefinitely, right? We are soaked in a world of people that demand proof. How could I offer you proof of any of these things? I'm just an Irish fella sitting in his car. How could I have proof of any of these things? There's very few people who have proof of these things. That's what investigations are for, right? So instead of demanding proof from people, we should be demanding investigations into these things, because there's enough like exploratory and circumstantial evidence there for anybody involved in the legal profession to be thinking there's definitely a case there. There's things that need to be answered there. It looks very likely that we could find a thread that joins all these beads together, right? So the explanatory power of perspective is something that you need to take account of when assessing the validity of it or not, right? Does it explain what you're seeing now? And my point on that is, you have international network, speculative, right? Alleged international network of child abusers, many world leaders who are being blackmailed based on their proclivities, right? And then you're seeing decisions that are being made that are totally counter to common sense and totally counter to the will of the people in most European lands, right? And the question then is, well, why do these people keep making these decisions, right? Why do they want to get rid of X all of a sudden, right? Get rid of it and don't let teenagers see it, right? Don't let the next generation grow up understanding what is being revealed now. Why are they doing that? Why are they continuously flooding the countries with people who don't belong here, that people don't want, right? Why are they trying to fast track them into military and into positions of security and defense? Who are they trying to protect themselves from? The native people, right? It certainly seems that way. So if you are looking at people in these positions of power who are desperately afraid of the fact that it's going to be revealed that if they're not directly involved in the worst forms of human action and behavior imaginable, then they're tangentially related to it, right? And you're seeing this with England, with Keir Starmer's Labour Party, with your man Lord Mandelson, right, who's involved with Jeffrey Epstein for decades, who was revealing national financial information to Jeffrey Epstein, right? And now his little protege, some Max Sweeney guy, is an advisor to Keir Starmer. He had to step down because of the links related to him as well, right? And then just across the Irish Sea, in Ireland, you have Max Sweeney, an advisor to the Labour Party's Prime Minister in England. His family are advisors to Fine Gael, a supposed nationalist political party in Ireland, right? So Simon Harris and Fine Gael, whether they want to admit it or not, they have a tangential link to Jeffrey Epstein, right? So this web spills everywhere. How deep that goes, who knows? We know Jeffrey Epstein was operating in Ireland. We know that he was being celebrated and at parties with Bertie Ahern, Mary Robinson, Bono, right? We also have witness testimony from these files that there was a woman taken from Ireland and she was brought to Ireland for politicians and notable men as a 13-year-old, right? So these things, while they seem all mad and just total Hollywood story stuff, it's not, right? Like, this stuff has been going on in this country for, I would say, centuries, but absolutely actively in terms of being state sponsored. The child abuse in Ireland has been alive and well for at least a century. At this point, yeah, at least a century. It's not beyond the realm of possibility. It is actually more likely that the abuse of Ireland under the care of the state and under successive governments in this land has not stopped at all, right? Hasn't stopped at all. And proof of that is the fact that we have, maybe it is shifting now, but we've had successive generations of people that are way too easy to accept the fact that this stuff doesn't happen here, where all the evidence to the contrary has been continuously shown to people. It's accepted commonly, right? So that would tell me that the apparatus in play has been extremely successful in red herringing people away from looking in the right direction and doubting their own instincts, right? So make of that what you will, but my overall point on it is not to prove anything, right? It's to just gather information, some just jot it down, other bits you pick up along the way, and say, what are we to make of this, right? And I would suggest to people that if you're dealing with people that are trying to make a move politically, socially, digitally, right, in terms of influencing people, and they're treating this stuff as wow and oh my god, this is crazy, careful. Be careful. This stuff is not crazy. This stuff, at least in Ireland, right, this stuff is pretty close to being the norm, right? We've been living our lives parallel to this for a long time, and it seems to be, and it's a fantastic time to be alive, right? It seems to be that the belly of the beast is being shown to the world, and we're getting closer to it being opened up and seeing what's inside of it, right? What has this beast been feeding on? This is happening, right? This is happening. And I think a lot of people might lose their minds before they ever even entertain it or accept the fact that this could be happening. But that does not make it true that it isn't, okay? For each person to decide themselves. But be honest with yourself. And if you're having a nervous reaction to something going, that can't be true, ask yourself what that's about. Thank you.